After his wife's funeral, a husband and his mistress are sure that they will receive her multi-million-dollar fortune. They go to the bank to withdraw the money, but there is an unexpected surprise. Subscribe to not miss new stories right in the comments from where you watch this video. Amelia Harris had always been a woman of vision. Born into a struggling black family in the outskirts of Atlanta, she knew from an early age that the world was not designed in her favor, but that never stopped her. By the time she was 30, she had built a business empire spanning multiple industries: technology, fashion, and real estate. She was not just wealthy, she was a symbol of black excellence, a woman who had defied every obstacle placed before her and created a legacy that many would only dream of. Despite her immense fortune, Amelia had never forgotten where she came from. She dedicated a significant portion of her resources to uplifting black women, providing scholarships, funding business incubators, and ensuring that young black girls had role models who looked like them. Her philanthropy was not just a hobby, it was her life's mission. She knew firsthand how the world treated black women, and if she could do anything to level the playing field, she would. Her husband, Thomas Harris, had never fully understood this part of her. A white man from an old money family, he had grown up in a world of privilege where success was expected, not earned. When he married Amelia, he had told himself it was for love, for her ambition and strength. But as the years passed, he began to resent the way she carried herself, the way she never needed him. He was used to men like him holding the power, making the decisions, being the ones to dictate the course of their wives' lives. But Amelia was different. She didn't need his guidance. She was the one in control. Their marriage had started with passion, but over time it had eroded into something mechanical, a partnership that existed more for public appearances than for any genuine connection. He played the role of the devoted husband at gala events and charity dinners, but behind closed doors there was a distance between them that neither of them cared to bridge. And then there was Catherine. Catherine was everything Amelia was not: young, eager, and, most importantly, willing to play the role of the woman who needed Thomas. She worked as a PR manager in one of Amelia's companies, but she had bigger ambitions than writing press releases. She wanted a life of luxury, of private jets and designer clothes, and she knew exactly how to get it. Thomas was her ticket. She had been patient, watching him grow more and more frustrated with Amelia's dominance. At first, he had been hesitant. He still had some remnants of guilt, some attachment to the life he had built with Amelia. But Catherine was persistent. She knew how to stroke his ego, how to remind him that he was still a man, still powerful. She whispered in his ear at night, planting seeds of discontent. "She doesn't need you, Thomas, but I do. You could have everything if only you took control. Why let her dictate everything? When she's gone, you'll finally be free." At first, Thomas had dismissed the thought, but as the years dragged on and Amelia continued to prioritize her businesses, her foundation, her endless social causes over him, the idea began to take root. He started to resent her money, her power, the way she made decisions without him. And then, when Amelia's health began to decline, he saw an opportunity. Amelia had always been a private person, even when it came to her own well-being. She never spoke openly about her health, never let anyone see her weaknesses. But Thomas had noticed the subtle signs: fatigue that lingered longer than usual, the quiet moments where she seemed lost in thought, the whispered conversations with doctors that she never shared with him. One evening, while she was out at a business conference, Thomas found himself in her study. He had always respected her privacy, but that night, something pushed him to open the locked drawer of her desk. Inside, he found medical reports. It was worse than he had imagined. A degenerative disease, something rare and untreatable. The doctors had given her months, maybe a year at most. He should have felt sorrow. He should have worried for her. But instead, a different thought formed in his mind. This would soon be his chance. Catherine had been overjoyed when he told her. She wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering promises of the life they would live. "In a few months, we'll be free, Tom. We can leave this place, take what's ours, and never look back." For the first time in years, Thomas felt a sense of excitement. No longer would he be in Amelia's shadow. No longer would he have to tolerate her endless lectures about empowering black women, about using wealth for a greater purpose. Soon, all of it would be his. But Amelia was not a woman who left things to chance. Even as she continued her public life, attending charity events and board meetings as if nothing was wrong, she was making her own preparations. She knew Thomas too well. She had seen the way he looked at her fortune, the way his patience with her causes had worn thin. She had no doubt that once she was gone, he would try to undo everything she had worked for. So she acted. She called her most trusted lawyer, a man who had handled her affairs for years, and gave him strict instructions. Her will was to be changed immediately. Every company, every dollar in her accounts, every property under her name. It would all go to the foundation she had built for black women. Thomas would receive only a modest stipend, just enough to cover his living expenses, but nothing more. She had built her empire from the ground up, and she would be damned if she let it fall into the hands of a man who had done nothing to deserve it. The lawyer hesitated. "Are you sure, Amelia? This is a drastic decision." She gave him a cold, knowing smile. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." A few days later, as she sat in her office overlooking the city skyline, Amelia allowed herself a small moment of peace. She knew her time was limited, but that no longer frightened her. What mattered was that her work would continue. Her wealth, her success, it was never about personal gain. It was about changing lives. And no matter what Thomas thought, no matter what he planned, he would never take that away from her. He simply didn't know it yet. Amelia Harris passed away on a crisp autumn morning. The sun had barely risen when the news broke, sending shockwaves through the business world and beyond. News anchors spoke in solemn tones about the legacy she left behind. A self-made billionaire, a champion for black women, a philanthropist who had dedicated her fortune to uplifting others. Across social media, tributes poured in. Women from across the country shared stories of how Amelia's foundation had changed their lives. Some spoke of scholarships that had allowed them to attend college, others of grants that had helped them start businesses. The world mourned her as a visionary, a beacon of hope, a woman who had defied expectations and rewritten the rules. But inside the Grand Harris estate, behind closed doors and drawn curtains, there was no mourning. Thomas Harris sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, listening to the distant hum of the television where reporters detailed Amelia's accomplishments. He barely paid attention. Instead, his mind was focused on one thing: the fortune she had left behind. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of freedom. He had spent the last decade trapped in Amelia's world, forced to play the role of the supportive husband while she basked in the limelight. But now she was gone, and that meant everything she had built, everything she had accumulated, would finally be his. He could already picture the future. The bank accounts, the properties, the investments. It was all waiting for him, ready to be claimed. And once he had it, he would be gone. He and Catherine would leave this place behind, start fresh somewhere far away, away from Amelia's shadow and everything she had prioritized over him. That evening, Catherine arrived at the estate, dressed in black out of respect, but her demeanor was far from grief-stricken. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled onto the leather couch beside him, her lips curving into a smile. "So," she said, swirling the deep red liquid in her glass, "when do we collect?" Thomas exhaled, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "Tomorrow. First thing in the morning, we go to the bank. The accounts will be transferred, and then we can start making arrangements." Catherine smirked. "I've already started looking at properties. Paris, maybe, or somewhere warm. Monaco, the Amalfi Coast, something private." He nodded, pleased by her enthusiasm. "Anywhere but here." Catherine leaned in closer, running a manicured finger along the rim of her glass. "And you're sure everything is in order?" Thomas chuckled, setting his drink down. "Of course. The will was written years ago and nothing's changed. She was too busy with her charities and businesses to bother updating anything. The lawyers will handle the legalities, and then it's all ours." Catherine's eyes gleamed. Finally. Tomorrow, their new life would begin. The next morning, Thomas dressed in his sharpest suit, the same one he had worn to the funeral the day before. He wanted to look composed, professional, the image of a grieving husband who was simply handling his late wife's affairs. Catherine, ever meticulous, dressed elegantly but modestly, knowing that appearances still mattered. They arrived at the bank just before noon. The building was an imposing structure of marble and glass, standing like a monument to old money and financial power. As they stepped inside, the hushed atmosphere of the bank only heightened the anticipation bubbling in Thomas's chest. A well-dressed manager greeted them, his expression one of polite sympathy. "Mr. Harris," he said, shaking Thomas's hand, "please accept our condolences. Mrs. Harris was a remarkable woman." Thomas nodded, feigning a somber look. "Thank you. She was." Catherine remained silent beside him, playing her role perfectly. The manager led them through the bank, past security doors and down a quiet corridor to his office. The room was sleek and professional, lined with shelves of neatly arranged files. The manager gestured for them to sit as he retrieved a thick folder from his desk. "Now," he began, flipping open the file, "as per standard procedure, we have reviewed Mrs. Harris's financial arrangements following her passing. There are a few formalities we need to discuss." Thomas nodded, his fingers tapping impatiently against the armrest of his chair. "Of course. Let's proceed." The manager hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "There is one thing we need to address first." Thomas frowned. "Yes?" The manager looked him directly in the eye. "Mrs. Harris amended her will shortly before her passing." For a brief moment, Thomas's breath caught. The words didn't fully register at first, but the uneasy look on the manager's face made his stomach tighten. "I'm sorry, what?" The manager cleared his throat. A month before her passing, Mrs. Harris updated her will and estate plans. The changes were made legally and with the assistance of her personal attorneys. Thomas felt Catherine stiffen beside him. He leaned forward, his tone sharp. And what exactly did she change? The manager flipped through the pages until he found the relevant document. All of Mrs. Harris's assets, her business holdings, her properties, her financial accounts, have been placed under the control of the foundation she created for black women. The funds will be allocated to educational programs, business grants, and housing assistance. Silence filled the room. Thomas's fingers clenched around the armrest. And what about me? The manager's expression didn't waver. As her legal spouse, you have been granted a personal stipend to cover basic living expenses, but the majority of the estate has been transferred to the foundation. These changes were made in accordance with Mrs. Harris's wishes and cannot be contested. The words were like a punch to the gut. Thomas felt the room spin around him. This wasn't possible. He had seen the will years ago. It had all been his. The money, the properties, everything. How had she done this? How had she planned so carefully, so perfectly to cut him out? Across the desk, the manager closed the folder and folded his hands. I understand this may come as a shock, Mr. Harris. If you need time to process. Catherine let out a sharp laugh, disbelief coloring her voice. This must be a mistake. The manager's polite expression remained unchanged. I assure you, miss, it is not. Thomas's jaw tightened, his vision blurring with fury. Amelia had done this on purpose. She had known exactly what he would try to do, and she had outplayed him even in death. Catherine's hand curled into a fist on her lap, her nails digging into her palm. She turned to Thomas, her voice cold. You said everything was taken care of. His mind raced. There had to be a way to fix this, to challenge it, to... Catherine abruptly stood up. You lied to me. Thomas turned to her, his voice low. Catherine, this isn't over. But she was already stepping away from the desk, her expression shifting from shock to something harder, something unforgiving. Her next words cut him like a blade. I didn't sign up for this. She turned on her heel and walked out of the office without looking back. Thomas barely registered the manager's voice as he stood to leave. His body moved on autopilot, his hands numb, his mind drowning in rage and disbelief. Amelia had won. Even from the grave, she had destroyed him. Thomas Harris walked out of the bank in a daze, the cold autumn air hitting his face like a slap. His mind was still struggling to process what had just happened. Amelia had done it. She had outmaneuvered him, even from beyond the grave. He had walked into that bank expecting to claim his long-awaited fortune only to be told it was gone. Redirected, repurposed, snatched away from him before he even had the chance to touch it. The noise of the city around him felt distant, muffled, as if he were moving through a dream. No, a nightmare. He barely registered Catherine's form as she stormed down the sidewalk ahead of him, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Catherine, he called after her, his voice still laced with the disbelief that gripped his chest like a vice. She didn't slow down. Catherine! She whirled around so suddenly that a passing pedestrian had to step aside to avoid walking into her. Her face was a mask of pure fury. Don't, she hissed, eyes flashing. Don't you dare try to explain this to me. Thomas took a step closer, lowering his voice. This isn't over. We'll fight it. The lawyers... Fight it? She let out a humorless laugh, folding her arms. With what, Thomas? You heard them. The will was changed. Everything's locked in. Do you really think you can just waltz into court and overturn the wishes of your billionaire wife? She planned this. She made sure you'd get nothing. His jaw clenched. The rage bubbling inside him threatened to boil over. I don't get nothing, he snapped. I still get something. Catherine scoffed, shaking her head. Oh, that's right. A modest stipend, she mocked, throwing his own words back at him. That's what they said, isn't it? Enough to cover basic living expenses. How generous of Amelia. Maybe you can rent a nice little apartment somewhere and get yourself a used car. Catherine, listen to me. No. She took another step back. You lied to me, Thomas. You promised me a life. A real life. Do you know how long I've waited for this? How many years I've wasted waiting for you to finally take control? And now you're telling me it was all for nothing? His hands curled into fists. I didn't know she'd done this. And that's the problem, Catherine snapped. She was smarter than you. She was always ahead of you. And now she's still ahead of you, even in death. Thomas felt his stomach twist. The truth of her words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Catherine stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then her expression hardened. I'm not staying for this, she said, her voice suddenly cold, emotionless. He frowned. What? I'm leaving. She turned on her heel and started walking again, faster this time. Wait. But she didn't stop. Catherine! This time she didn't even look back. Thomas watched her go, his pulse hammering against his skull. Just minutes ago, she had been his future, his promise of something better, of something more. And now she was gone, just like that. He let out a slow, shuddering breath, his hands still clenched at his sides. Amelia had taken everything from him. Everything. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Thomas wandered aimlessly through the city, unable to return home, unable to face the reality of what had happened. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bank manager's face, heard the calm certainty in his voice as he explained what Amelia had done. Every time he thought about calling his lawyer, the weight of the situation crushed him again. There was no loophole, no way out. The worst part, it wasn't just about the money. It was the fact that Amelia had outplayed him. For years, he had believed himself to be in control of his own fate. He had convinced himself that when the time came, everything would fall into place just as he had planned. But now, standing here, alone in a city that still belonged to Amelia, more than it would ever belong to him, he realized just how foolish he had been. She had known. She had known exactly what kind of man he was. She had known what he wanted, and she had made sure he would never get it. The weight of it settled over him like a suffocating fog. Eventually, when exhaustion overtook him, he hailed a cab and gave the driver the address to the Harris estate. He barely registered the ride, barely noticed the towering gates as the car pulled up to the grand mansion that had once felt like his, but now felt like nothing more than an empty shell. Inside, silence greeted him. The house was dark, hollow, devoid of the presence it once had. For years, he had resented this place. He had hated the way it always felt more like Amelia's domain than his own. But now, standing here, he realized something that sent a fresh wave of anger through him. Even if she was gone, this was still her house. Her name was on the deed. Her wealth had built it. Her decisions had shaped it. And now, thanks to her final act of defiance, he would never be able to escape that truth. He walked through the halls, past the grand staircase, past the lavish sitting rooms, past the portraits of Amelia that still hung on the walls. He wanted to rip them down. He wanted to tear this place apart, but he didn't. Because what would be the point? Amelia had already won, and he had already lost. That night, he sat alone in his study, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was his lawyer. For a brief moment, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe there was a way out of this. Maybe there was something they could do. He answered. Thomas, The voice on the other end greeted him. "I assume you've heard the news." He exhaled sharply. "I need options." There was a pause. "I'm afraid there aren't any." Thomas's grip on the phone tightened. "There has to be something. I've reviewed the documents and everything was done legally. Amelia's will is airtight. There's no loophole, no legal grounds for contesting it. Her assets belong to the Foundation now. You'll receive your stipend, but that's it." His jaw clenched. "Then what the hell am I supposed to do?" The lawyer sighed. "Adjust, Thomas. There's nothing else to be done." The call ended. Thomas set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had lost, completely. The realization hit him like a freight train. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no next move, no future. All he had left was the bitter taste of failure. And the ghost of Amelia Harris, still haunting him in ways he never thought possible. Thomas Harris had always believed that wealth equaled power. He had spent his entire life convinced that as long as he had money, as long as he could control the flow of it, he could control everything. People, relationships, his future. Now, sitting alone in the vast, empty mansion that once felt like a cage, but now felt like a tomb, he realized just how wrong he had been. The day after his conversation with his lawyer, he woke up with the dull ache of a hangover pounding at his temples. He had spent most of the night drowning in whiskey, trying to blot out the crushing reality that he was no longer a man of wealth, no longer a man of status. Amelia had ensured that. He wandered aimlessly through the house, moving from room to room as if seeing them for the first time. The extravagant decor, the imported furniture, the priceless artwork, none of it was his. It had always been hers. And now, without her, it all felt meaningless. At some point, he found himself standing in front of one of Amelia's portraits. It was a formal painting, one she had reluctantly agreed to sit for during a gala fundraiser years ago. She looked regal in it, poised, powerful. A lump formed in his throat as he stared at it. "You really planned this to the end, didn't you?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. Amelia had known him better than he knew himself. She had seen his weakness, his greed, his entitlement. She had watched him grow resentful of her success, her independence. She had understood, long before he had even realized it himself, that the moment she was gone, he would try to take everything for himself. And so, she had taken it away first. A dry, bitter laugh escaped him. For years, he had believed himself to be the one waiting for Amelia to be gone so he could finally live. But now, standing here in the ruins of his own failed scheme, he understood the truth. Amelia had been waiting for him to be gone, and she had succeeded. The first official notice came a few days later, a formal letter from the estate lawyer detailing the next steps in the transfer of assets to the Foundation. He would be given time to vacate the mansion. It would soon belong to the organization that would oversee the fund. Thomas had known it was coming, but the words still stung when he read them. He had no idea where he would go. The stipend Amelia had left him was just enough to cover a modest lifestyle, an apartment, basic expenses, but it was nowhere near the kind of wealth he had spent his life accustomed to. He could try to reinvest, try to build something of his own, but the truth was he had never actually built anything. Everything he had was because of Amelia. And now she was gone. As he sat at his desk, staring at the letter in front of him, his phone buzzed. He hesitated before answering. "Sophie." His daughter's voice on the other end was clipped, distant. "Dad?" There was a long pause. "You heard?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I did." Another silence. "Are you calling to rub it in?" A sigh came through the line. "No, Dad, I'm calling because, I don't know. I guess I just wanted to hear what you were thinking." Thomas swallowed hard. What was he thinking? That he had spent his entire life chasing something that had never truly been his? That he had let his own resentment and greed blind him to the fact that he had once had a family, a wife who had trusted him, a daughter who had looked up to him, that he had thrown it all away for nothing? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know, Sophie." She was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, she said, "I saw what Mom did, the foundation. I think she knew this was going to happen, Dad. I think she knew you would try to take everything, and she didn't want that to be her legacy." Thomas let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, she knew." Sophie's voice softened just a little. "Do you regret it?" Did he? He thought about Catherine walking away from him without a second thought. He thought about the bank manager's calm, unwavering voice as he had explained the reality of the situation. He thought about the empty mansion around him, about the silence that had settled over his life now that there was nothing left to fight for. "I don't know if regret changes anything," he admitted finally. "But yeah, I think I do." Another silence, but this time it didn't feel as cold. "If you're staying in the city," Sophie said, "maybe we could, I don't know, have dinner sometime." Thomas closed his eyes. Maybe it was a pity offer. Maybe it was just Sophie doing what Amelia would have wanted her to do, offering him a second chance even when he didn't deserve one. But at this point, he had nothing left to lose. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'd like that." The night of their dinner, Thomas dressed simply. No expensive suits, no polished shoes, just something comfortable. Sophie had chosen a small cafe in the heart of the city, far from the glitzy restaurants he and Amelia had once dined at. When he arrived, she was already there, waiting for him at a small table by the window. For the first time in a long time, he really looked at her. She was 27 now, no longer the little girl who used to run into his office, begging for him to take a break and play with her. She had grown up without him, built a life that had nothing to do with him. And yet, she was here. "Hey," she said as he sat down. "Hey." A waiter came by, took their orders. They talked at first about small things, her work, her life, the foundation. He asked how involved she planned to be, and she admitted that she wanted to do more, wanted to honor her mother's work. She didn't ask him about his future. Maybe she knew he didn't have an answer. After dinner, as they walked outside, Sophie stopped. "I don't know what's going to happen, Dad," she said, "but if you really mean it, if you really do regret it, maybe this doesn't have to be the end." Thomas looked at her, standing there with her mother's fire in her eyes, her strength in the way she carried herself. Maybe, for the first time, he had a chance to do something different, to not be the man Amelia had outplayed, to be someone else entirely. He nodded. "I'd like that," he said, and for the first time in years he meant it. The weeks that followed were slow, but for Thomas they were necessary. He moved into a modest apartment, nothing extravagant, but enough. He watched from a distance as Amelia's foundation flourished, as her name continued to be spoken with admiration, as her legacy lived on in ways he could never erase. He didn't fight it anymore, because in the end, Amelia had won. And maybe, just maybe, that was the way it was always supposed to be. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more captivating tales. Share this video with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're looking for more intriguing stories, watch the next video that's on your screen right now.
I hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback inspires more epic tales.